Picture this: a moonless night somewhere in the vast sprawl of medieval Europe. A lone torch flickers at the edge of a stone courtyard, its flame clawing at the darkness like a creature desperate to escape. A hush falls over the gathered townsfolk as heavy wooden doors groan open. Chains clank, iron scrapes, and two figures, one man, one woman, are dragged to the center of a waiting circle. Their punishment, the crowd already knows, will be a spectacle. But what they cannot yet imagine is the sheer inventiveness of cruelty about to unfold before their eyes. Hold tight, because tonight we are diving into the brutal, mind-bending world of medieval slave discipline, where pain was currency, fear was control, and punishment was theater. If you think you've heard it all before, trust me, you haven't. Stay with me, smash that subscribe button right now so you never miss our darkest deep dives, and drop a comment below telling us which moment shocks you the most. Ready? Let's step into the shadows. In the medieval mindset, a slave was less a person than an expendable asset, a breathing tool chained to land, household, or treasury. Lords, merchants, and even monasteries counted their value not just in harvest or coin, but in the obedience of those they owned. And obedience was enforced through an arsenal of punishments, so varied, so ritualized, that they formed a gruesome choreography of power. Imagine dawn breaking over a rural manor in 11th century Normandy. The fields glimmer with dew, but in the manor yard, a whipping post stands taller than any tree. At its base waits a bailiff wielding a knot-studded whip called the flagrum. When a slave dares to steal a morsel of bread or return late from the fields, the lord orders a public flogging. Stripped to the waist, the offender is lashed 10, 20, sometimes 50 times, each strike designed to break skin and spirit. Children peer through fence slats, women avert their eyes, and the smell of iron-rich blood mingles with the scent of fresh hay. And yet the whip was merely entry level. Step into bustling 12th century Venice, hub of Mediterranean commerce. Here, slaves ferry silk and spices across canals, but a single act of defiance can lead to branding. Picture a red-hot iron shaped like a dog's head, the marca canis, pressed against a human shoulder. The sizzling flesh sends up a stench that hangs over the water long after the screams fade. That burn is forever, a living mark that cries property of the Zane family, telling every passerby that this body has an owner, and that escape means nothing but more fire. Venice was not unique. Across Christendom, branding became both punishment and passport. Some estates chose initials, others full coats of arms burned onto thighs or forearms. For runaway slaves, the penalty distilled into a single letter, an F for fugitivus, seared onto the forehead, ensuring no sanctuary anywhere within Christendom's reach. Each brand made escape nearly impossible, stoking an eternal dread more potent than any chain. Speaking of chains, let's talk about the collar. In monastic ledgers from Catalonia, blacksmiths record forging heavy iron rings with inch-long spikes pointing inward. These torture collars were not always locked in place. Sometimes they were fixed to a length of chain anchored to a wall, forcing the wearer into a semi-kneel for days. Every movement meant skin-scraping metal, a reminder that the body was no longer its own. Now, before we plunge even deeper, quick reality check. Are you feeling that sick churn in your stomach? Good. That's empathy telling you to keep watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, and ring the bell so you get notified when we unearth the next layer of darkness. And while you're at it, comment with the single word that captures your feeling right now: rage, sadness, horror, you name it. Let's see how many different emotions one story can evoke. Back to the nightmare. Public humiliation played its own sinister symphony. In market towns from York to Krakow, pillories and stocks weren't just for petty criminals, they were a stage for slave discipline. Picture our earlier female captive, wrists and neck locked into a wooden frame. The townsfolk pelt her with rotten vegetables, mud, even stones, yet the physical bruises pale beside the psychic scar of being laughed at by children, spat on by elders, and leered at by drunkards. And at dusk, when the guards finally release her swollen limbs, she still has to limp back to the manor that owns her soul. Sometimes humiliation fused with mutilation. The Byzantine Ekloga law code, revived in parts of the Balkans, prescribed nose slitting for female slaves who attempted to poison their masters. Picture the scene: a jagged iron blade held by a city enforcer, the swift downward motion, the spray of blood on marble steps. A disfigured face was deemed a living warning, a billboard of terror inscribed in flesh. But perhaps the most chilling punishments were those that masqueraded as mercy. Islamic courts in medieval Al-Banus occasionally levied castration on male slaves who repeatedly raped female servants, a grotesque form of justice that doubled as deterrent. Surgeons, if you can call them that, performed the procedure with heated knives to cauterize wounds instantly. Survivors endured infection, humiliation, and lifelong hormonal torment, serving their masters in eunuch roles afterward. Across the Mediterranean, female slaves faced equally gendered horrors. A runaway woman captured on the Barbary coast might have her ears severed to prevent her from adorning them with jewelry, an ironic cruelty, stripping her of beauty in order to strip her of hope. Greek legal manuals even record breast slitting for women who killed their newborn children rather than see them enslaved, an act the law labeled infanticide, though some modern historians call it a desperate bid for mercy. Let's pause for a visual reenactment. Picture flickering torchlight illuminating a Romanesque hall in 12th century Toulouse. Two guards force a kneeling slave to extend his hands over a block. The lord approaches with a dull hatchet, one swift motion, and the last finger of the right hand lies twitching on the wood. Finger amputation was a common incremental punishment, each missing digit a ledger entry of disobedience. Play that scene in your mind, hear the crack of bone, the gasp of the onlooking household, and ask yourself, what would a single finger cost you? You might wonder how society justified this theatre of pain. Clergy sermons often quoted St. Paul's epistles, urging slaves to obey earthly masters, twisting scripture into a whip. Secular laws codified punishment as property protection. In 1251, the Norwegian jolating laws set precise compensation, 1 silver mark for a slave's lost eye, paid not to the victim but to the owner, whose investment was damaged. The system valued flesh like livestock, with spreadsheets of suffering long before spreadsheets existed. Yet resistance simmered beneath the surface. Chronicles whisper of clandestine meetings where slaves conspired to sabotage tools or poison wells. Punishment, paradoxically, became both deterrent and catalyst, each lash drawing blood, but also stoking rage. In Iberia, Moorish and Christian galleys alike feared coordinated revolts, so they chained slaves not just by ankles but also in alternating rhythms to prevent synchronized rowing strong enough to overpower guards. Control demanded creativity. And then there were the death sentences, administered with macabre artistry. Some English lords practiced gibbeting, hanging the corpse of an executed slave in an iron cage at crossroads. The body would remain until sun and crow stripped it to bone, a slow public lesson in futility. In the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia, rebels were sometimes flayed alive, skin peeled in strips, salt rubbed into the raw muscle, agony prolonged until shock claimed them. Medieval imagination knew no ceiling. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating punishment required no physical blow at all. Masters threatened to sell a slave's children to far-off lands. For mothers and fathers, that looming separation was terror distilled to its purest form. Documents from Genoese slave markets list sales with child kept or child removed, administrative shorthand for heartbreak. The possibility alone kept countless parents in line, turning love into shackles stronger than any iron. Keep breathing, we're not done. By now, if your heart is pounding, drop a like. Let's get this story to as many viewers as possible, and share your thoughts. Should these punishments be taught in schools as part of mainstream curricula? Your voice matters. Let's travel to the steppes of Kievan Ruses. Here, slaves captured in border raids endured the pollard, a grisly ordeal where offenders were buried up to the neck outside village walls. Passing travelers relieved themselves on exposed heads, and crows pecked at eyes. Survival could stretch to days, every moment a degradation of both body and identity. When execution finally came, often a mercy blow, it felt almost like deliverance. Yet, not all punishments demanded blood. Some masters enforced silence. In certain North African households, slaves wore wooden gags padlocked at the back, blocking speech for weeks. Denied the very tool of language, they became ghosts in their own lives, moving silently through corridors, gestures their only means of existence. Historians call this the linguistic chain, arguing it eroded memory, culture, self. And then there's the dance of the bells. Italian city-states sometimes fitted runaways with iron anklets threaded with tiny bells. Every footstep became a confession, a perpetual alarm system resounding through cobblestone alleys. The psychological weight of constant exposure, the knowledge that stealth was impossible, crushed hopes of flight far more effectively than physical locks. Zoom in on a late-night chamber, illuminated by a single wax candle. A young maid, aged 15, kneels while a matron heats a needle over the flame. The girl's crime? Sneaking food for her starving brother to avoid the whip. The matron pierces the maid's tongue, threading coarse twine through it and knotting it beneath the chin. For 3 days the girl cannot speak, eat properly, or swallow without pain. This silent torture, recorded in a Neapolitan notary's ledger, exemplifies how mundane household items became instruments of dominance. As we edge toward our finale, let's confront a disturbing question. Did anyone fight back? Oh yes. Slave rebellions erupted across medieval landscapes, though many were drowned in blood and tragically erased from official chronicles. A 1323 uprising on the island of Chios saw plantation slaves seize a fortress for 3 nights, reportedly killing their overseer with the same iron collar once used on them. The rebellion failed, but its echo reverberated in hushed tavern tales, an ember of hope passed from generation to generation. The threat of revolt forced incremental reforms. By the late 15th century, some Iberian cities limited the number of lashes a slave could receive in a single punishment, 39 for men, 25 for women, mirroring Jewish halakhic law and hinting at cross-cultural moral seepage. Still, cruelty outlived the Middle Ages, morphing into new shapes across oceans and centuries, leaving legacies we continue to wrestle with today. And that, dear viewer, brings us to the edge of a darker abyss. Because if punishment forged obedience, imagine what happened when fear finally snapped, when slaves rose not with chains but with fire and fury. Imagine the hidden strategies, the coded songs, the smuggled daggers, and the moment a single spark ignited revolutions that would rock empires. But that story, my friends, we'll save for next time. So, if you want to witness the explosive rise of medieval slave rebellions, the secret networks, the betrayals, the unlikely victories, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you don't miss the continuation of this saga. Share this video with a friend who thinks history is dull and prove them wrong. And before you click away, tell us in the comments, which punishment chilled you the most and why. We read every single response, and your insights often guide our next deep dives. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and never forget the human stories etched in the margins of history. The past is closer than you think, and sometimes it's thirsty for remembrance.